Hi everyone, welcome to Event Space. Thank you for coming. I'm David Brommer. I have the pleasure of running the event space here at B&H. We've been doing events since November 2007, and it's been a wonderful institution that B&H has allowed us to have. And we'd like to say that in here, this is all about inspiration, learning, exploring techniques, exploring photography, video, and anything that we have to do that's creative. In terms of sales, we've got about thousands and thousands of square feet right outside this room where it's all about sales. So I'm just going to talk to you guys today about composition, and we're going to go beyond the rule of thirds. We're going to cover some very basics in composition, and then we're going to go into some more advanced areas of composition. We're going to go beyond the rule of thirds. This is kind of important stuff. I learned a lot about this by a wonderful teacher I had named George Bates in Colonia High School, and I took it with me, and it's been a good road. It's been a great ride. I'm a photographer. I did a lot of photography in the Northeast in the late 80s and the early 90s. Then I moved to Seattle, and I owned and operated a gallery and studio called Suspect Photography. I've done a large project called the Seattle Suspects, which is just came off of a show in Buffalo, New York, and it's going to be up in New York soon. I came to New York City with a large body of work, and it was all black and white work, and everybody in the late 90s in New York City said, we want to see color work. So I took a job at B&H Photo, and I rented out a studio, and I started working on color and built up a body of color work and adopted digital photography. And then adopting digital photography, I kind of became a little bit of an expert on digital in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was my job to train the sales staff at B&H from film photography over to digital photography. And then that kind of led me to teaching classes at ICP, International Center of Photography, main workshops, and also national organizations, photo organizations across the country. So it's been a great ride, and I really love photography, all about it. And this class I derived specifically because as I was doing the event space, people were showing me their work, and I saw these basic compositional errors that were happening. For a lot of us that aren't formally trained in art, I was able to bring some of my trainings and put it together in this class. And I think we've done it almost 20 times. So welcome to better photographic composition beyond the rule of thirds. Okay, so I do believe that you have to know where you came from before you move forward. So let's just talk a little bit about a history and an evolution of art, and this is going to kind of set the pace for us as we experience the rules that are in composition, because there are a couple of rules. Okay, everything starts with cave paintings. So these are petroglyphs. Petroglyphs were man's first attempt at creating artwork. And there was a purpose and a theory behind this, aside from just the aesthetics. Half of it was primitive man was trying to illustrate the world around him. The practical use for this was that they could show you specifically what animals would be going through hunting trails at certain times, so they could relate the prey and herds that were moving through at certain seasons. And this was something that was important because as the tribes would migrate from area to area, a new tribe could occupy a cave system, look at the walls, and understand what type of prey and what type of herds were going to be moving through. So this was pretty important stuff. But note though, it's on rocks, it's on cave walls, not very portable. Move into one of the cradles of civilization, the Egyptians, and the Egyptians really took things very far. They went from petroglyphs and went to hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs were using symbols to actually convey words and convey thoughts and convey meanings back and forth. The early Egyptians were working on clay tablets. We also know about the Babylonians working in cuneiform, working on clay tablets or scratching it into rocks. And this was a good setup. This worked out pretty good, and it really started to evolve language and art together, which is quite important because as we're going to speak and we go further, we want to definitely tell stories with our photographs. So this is sort of rooted in that in a certain way. But this is one of the first Epson printers. You guys may have known this, but Epson printers were printing on papyrus at around 900 BC. No, only kidding. Epson printers weren't around 900 BC. Epson printers were getting really good around 1997, 98 with the Photo EX. But this is an important development because what the Egyptians were able to do was take papyrus, which grew on the Nile River, and create the first paper. And they were able to take what they had to say, roll it up, and be able to transport it. So imagine that they want to maybe make rules, laws, trade papers, concepts, ideas, they could put it onto papyrus, roll it up, put it on a ship. That ship could now sail to Carthage or Greece or out into the world, and it could kind of bring their culture out there, bring what they have to say out there. So that's pretty important, papyrus. You know, rolling up a piece of papyrus is a lot easier than walking around with stone tablets. Also, they tend to last longer. They had really good quality dyes, and the papyrus was like the equivalent of Moab paper for its day, so this stuff would last pretty long. There is the classical era that happens during the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire grows. And unfortunately, we don't know so much about the art of the Roman Empire. And the main reason for that is that the Roman Empire wasn't so stable in the end. You had barbarian incursions, you had an erosion of the government, you had fires, you had plagues. A lot of bad things happened right around anywhere from, let's say about 50 BC right up to around 200 AD. Things started to get very hard for art to survive. Architecture survives, which we see that. So like the Colosseum, we see that, the Parthenon, things like that we see. But even in terms of sculpture, sculpture takes some major hits. And there's some conjecture that sculpture back in the classical era was actually painted to look like flesh, or colors were painted on it. That paints didn't survive, so we just know sculpture as naked marble, basically. But there was some talk about that. But what happens is that we start to enter this Dark Ages, and we enter the medieval art period. So from 400 to 1300, it's a kind of a rough world. When I say kind of a rough world, we've got roaming bands of barbarians going up and down Europe. We lose touch with the Holy Lands. They become very distant, hard to find, hard to get to due to geopolitical reasons. And the church really takes over. And people find solace in this cataclysmic time, especially with the words that the church were saying with the Old Testament and end of days. You know, I kind of laugh when people are like, oh, we're end of days, things are going to be ending soon. You know what? People have been saying that for a long time. You think things are bad now. Could you imagine a plague running through a continent and taking out 1 out of 3 people? Imagine 1 out of 3 people you know being lost in a plague. It's pretty heavy duty stuff. So this was a very dark world that was going on back then. And painting sort of reflected that. What we get is we get a very flat, two-dimensional, not a great use of colors. The important thing here is two-dimensional. Everything looks very flat. No one is really going to say that medieval painting, while it's historically important, it wasn't very flattering, especially for the subjects that were being painted. So it's a pretty tough time during the medieval age. But then we have a glimmer of hope. The Renaissance forms. Renaissance actually centers itself in 2 places. It centers itself in Florence, and it centers itself in Venice. Why are these 2 places important? First thing for Venice is that Venice is a natural lagoon and a beautiful port town. And Venice becomes a place that the Crusades can go to Venice, outfit themselves, get onto ships, and go to the Holy Land. And then when they return, usually they go back to Venice, and that becomes the port. So we get this learning and information going backwards and forwards from the Holy Land, Jerusalem, to Venice. If you were going to run a crusade and you were going to go through Turkey and go through the mainland, very difficult to drive your army through that. Much easier to get on galleys and go into the Mediterranean and approach the Holy Land and do the crusades that way. The other big one is Florence. Florence is very key because Florence is run by the Medicis. And the Medicis are genius rulers. What they do is, instead of spending their wealth on raising massive armies, they make political and diplomatic security around them so that they can take their coffers and their money and turn it back onto themselves. They can do great feats like have Brunelleschi design the Duomo in Florence, which was a lost art. The architecture needed to create that massive dome was actually lost during the Dark Ages. Brunelleschi, who was a watchmaker and won the award to go build that dome, actually traveled to Rome to look at ancient ruins to figure out how to make a dome. That's pretty impressive if they could do something before BC and then lose that information 1,000 years later. So it becomes a perfect storm for arts. And what happens is that there's a wonderful artist named Giotto. And Giotto becomes very important in the Renaissance. Giotto is the guy that we codify almost all of our modern art from. So first things that Giotto does is he starts to set the rules for many things we're going to be talking about. Over here we have positive and negative space. Notice 1/3, the figures are 1/3 in the line. Notice how there's perspective happening. It's a three-dimensional image. There's what's called a vanishing point happening on the horizon. And we've got really nice positive and negative space and nice geometry. Compare that with this, and you'll see that Giotto is really revolutionary. So Giotto is working for the church primarily, and he's creating friezes, and he's putting them up in churches, and he gets a lot of attention. And what happens is we've got this, all the other artists start to go to these churches and study his friezes and understand his composition, what he's doing. He's really the first illuminated painter, very important in terms of art because he really sets the pace for all of what we consider rules of art that happen later on. So he does things like incorporating three. This is a common theme within the Judeo-Christian mythology. This is an Annunciation. And this is heavy-duty material. This is where an angel comes to Mary and says, Mary, you're pregnant with the Son of a God, which is kind of heavy subject matter. I mean, I'm not going to get into the religious aspect of it, but this is the themes that's going on. Very heavy-duty, very pensive, and we start to see this theme really explodes throughout the Renaissance. But then luckily, some guys come and study Giotto. And the first one I really like to point out is Botticelli. Sandro Botticelli is another Florentine. Again, the Medicis just set up that perfect storm for art to happen. But what he does is that he works in two thematics. He works in Judeo-Christian mythology, and he also works in pagan mythology. The beauty of Botticelli is that when he works in a pagan thematic, the colors get very expressive. He becomes very free. This is the Birth of Venus. And has anyone seen this painting up close in the Uffizi in Florence? It's breathtaking, isn't it? It'll make you cry. It's a lot larger. I studied it for years in books, and when I finally got there, I was like, wow, it's pretty amazing. I fell in love with Venus. But we've got some complicated composition here. We've got our figures broken into three, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. The horizon is 2/3 up, and it's very allegorical. It's telling a whole story going on. Now, he wasn't the only one to do that. We've also got Leonardo da Vinci, who grew up outside of Florence, did a lot of work in Florence until he got in trouble and had to exile himself to Milan. Now, on this one, I never read Daniel Brown, but I studied this one extensively. Some interesting things happen on this. Notice all the lines and the perspectives go down to the Christ right eye, even in the ceiling. Even the parts of the lintels and the windows go right down onto Christ's right eye. Now, there's a lot of storytelling going on with this image as well. The apostles are grouped in groups of three. And there's a moment that this was supposedly done where Christ finishes dinner and he says, tonight one of you will betray me. At that point, all the apostles are in an active denial. We wouldn't do that. We love you. You're the man. You're the big JC. We would never betray you. We wouldn't do that. But notice, though, one figure is not in an act of denial. Judas. Matter of fact, Judas still has his hand on the bread. He's still eating. So this is some pretty advanced storytelling that's going on here. This is where we start to look into context within images, messages that are happening, and then it's reinforced by really good compositional rules laid forth by Giotto, because look at the geometry to it. You guys see how all those lines are showing down on Christ, on that right eye specifically. Pretty cool stuff. Now this one, if you guys ever get a chance to go to Italy, this is in Milan, and I highly recommend Google it, learn about the church, and book your tickets to go see it. Because Mr. Da Vinci was very radical, and he wouldn't use a lot of conventional methods to do his paintings with. So it's faded very heavily. And on top of it all, when Napoleon was in Milan, they used this to quarter his troops and used it as a stable. This was actually in a dining area for monks and part of this church. So what happened was the Napoleon soldiers were actually throwing dung at it. So this painting has taken some major hits. But I'll tell you what, talk about Stendhal syndrome. You go see this one, and it's beautiful, and you'll end up crying from it. So it's a pretty heavy-duty image. We're going to go a little bit forward. We're going to go to the Dutch masters, which are very important in painting in the history of art. This is Jan Vermeer and the View of Delft. And why this is important is that this is the first time that an age of hyperrealism gets put into the imagery. Hyperrealism meaning that the perspectives are absolutely perfect. This could be a photograph. The way that the horizon's set up, the study of light that's in the sky, and the way that the building's perspective is completely controlled. It looks like it was shot with a 4x5 camera. Very perfect. Also notice just that little slice of land that's in the foreground. The horizon is 1/3 up, and then we have 2/3 of the sky. So you may say, you're right, that Jan Vermeer looked like a photograph. This led to something quite interesting, the Hockney-Falco thesis. Now we've got David Hockney, who's the artist, and Falco, who's an art theory writer and physicist. And would they think that a camera obscura is used to create these images, and that several artists during the later part of the Renaissance were doing the Reformation were using camera obscura. So in terms of art, this is where photography and fine art really start to come close to very close. Now photography as we know it today basically is invented around 1823, 1821, but this is where a camera obscura is being used. Now the way a camera obscura works is that it's basically done in a dark room. So imagine that the event space here was completely blacked out, and we had pinholes, one pinhole in each part of these windows. If we were to turn out the lights and our eyes would adjust to the dark, we would see an upside down version of the B&H sales floor over on this wall. So what they were saying was that Jan Vermeer and some of these guys were basically setting up here on this area a dark enclosed box. They would put a piece of, put canvas on one side of the box, have a hole on the other side, stand inside the box and actually trace out the camera obscura to come up with this perfect perspective of the city and some other works. Other artists also used reflecting mirrors and some odd things like that to copy the real world around them. Now, this is a theory, and it has its detractors and it has its support, but I thought it's very interesting to bring it together because who here is a photographer or came here for photography today? Okay, pretty much all of us. So this just links everything I told you about art moving forward. I want to show you another interesting one. This is Umberto Boccioni, who's another Milanese, another Italian. Those Italians seem to really have their art together. And he's what's called a futurist. And the futurists were interested in movement and action and creating a dynamic nature to paintings. Everything I've showed you thus far has been very static paintings. Here, he's trying to paint movement, which I think is very relevant to us as photographers because we have tools to use to control shutter speeds on our cameras to indicate movement. We can do pans and interesting things like that. Can anyone see what this subject is? What's going on? Anyone care to guess? Shout it out. It's a horse? Yep, it's a horse. And then in the background, what do you think is in the background? Looks like boats, right? So it's like a guy on a horse in a harbor. And then you also, what it looks like smokestacks in the background. So in terms of researching what's going on with the futurists were kin to the cubists. That's for certain, because you can see a cubism happening with this, the breakdown of shapes to indicate a larger subject. But also showing the age of the factories that were going on in Milan, boats showing a movement, things like that happening, just becomes very relevant. Let's get into let's go a little bit more into the future, Salvador Dali. And Dali's really easy to see those tenets of composition. Look at the sky, again, it's two-thirds up. We've got great positive and negative space happening here, dark areas, light areas, and then interesting lines happening that are going to fall into the rule of thirds. So Dali really puts it together. And Dali, of course, was a school, this is the Surrealist art movement. So all these things come into play. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to make everyone put their hands over their hearts and make 3 resolution vows. And we're going to talk about studying art in general, because everything I've just showed you is relevant to photography in a certain way. Okay, one thing that links everything together we've been talking about is 3. 3 is very important because you are here at Beyond the Rule of Thirds, 3. And I've been babbling a little bit about 3 quite a bit. 3 is an important number. We use 3 as a metaphor all the times. Even if you look at a car manufacturer, you'll see the entry-level car, the mid-size, and then the SUV. So we've got small, medium, and large. Even if you were to go outside and look at cameras, you'll see the entry-level Nikon D3100, then you'll see the mid-level D90 or D5100, and then you go up to the D7000, D700, the big cameras. We tend to think in terms of 3s very frequently. What do we have for dinner? We have an appetizer, we have our main course, and then our best part, we have dessert. So these threes just keep happening. We're hardwired for threes. So that's how this kind of works for, and I talk about hardwired pretty often. That's how the rule of thirds bases itself. So let's do a quick refresher on what is the rule of thirds. So if we were to take an image and basically make a tic-tac-toe of the image, we're going to be able to divide it into 3 quadrants, either horizontally or vertical. So horizontally, we've got a quadrant, a quadrant, a quadrant horizontally, and then vertically and vertically and vertically, we have a quadrant. But at the intersections of these quadrants, important things happen. That's where the subject can reside. And we're going to have to decide which quadrant we put places. If we put the subject in the right quadrant for all the good reasons, the image will have balance and will look proper. If we throw the image into the wrong quadrant, then it just doesn't work. And bad composition is just like tasting something bitter. It just doesn't work. It's not sweet. You immediately make a face and spit it out. So that's, unless it's Passover. So that's kind of the way that the rule of thirds works. And let's just show this in example. So this is Michael Kenna. Michael Kenna is an Englishman who he moves to San Francisco, and he really cuts his teeth as a printer. And he prints a lot of the famous photographer Ruth Bernhard's work. And then he also does branch out and do his own work. And he's one of my favorite photographers. And why I love him is that it's simplicity. Michael Kenna is also influenced heavily by Asian art, which is, again, for Asian art is very simple artwork. So we've got this tree, and we've got a little bit of a horizon going on. How does it fall into the rule of thirds? Well, the tree is placed right there in that the bottom left-hand rule of thirds conjecture. We've got the horizon falls, 1/3 of the horizon goes up, and we have that broad open area up on top. Now, could you imagine if the tree was right in the center? It might still work because it's so graphic and such an interesting look, but throwing the tree over into that spot right there, it just works nicely, and it kind of gives a little bit of a balance to the image. So it weighs it down. When we start to look at this image, we start on this side, we go in here, we follow this line, and then we go up to see if there's any more details in the image. But alas, this is a very simple image to look at and actually understand. Simple use of the rule of thirds, prime example, everyone can kind of figure this one out. Okay, this is Vincent Laforet, and Vincent Laforet is something totally different. Vincent Laforet is a famous photographer, and now he's become a videographer. Vincent Laforet was the master of doing aerials to actually tell stories. He would do a lot of aerial work, and he really did wonderful things with the aerial. He would also use tilt-shift lenses. So he's using a tilt-shift lens to photograph sports. This is the US Open. For those of you that aren't familiar with a tilt-shift lens, you've got your camera. The camera lens is mounted onto the camera, and that's fixed. But on a tilt-shift lens, the front element can actually swivel or go up and down, which is kind of neat, and it allows you to do very selective focusing. So looking at this image, you say, like, well, how does the rule of thirds really play into it? Because he's over in a corner of the stadium. We've got a lot of diagonal lines. And would you agree that this is a nice image? It's pretty cool. Vincent says that he paid this guy $20 to stand up, but that's a Vincent myth. It's not true, actually. But what it does is, if you look at it and we were to rotate it, it actually does fall into the rule of thirds quite well when we do a rotation on it. So we've got the one subject very close down to the winner, turning around, giving that just one look, and we've got it close to this quadrant here. The way that the green in the negative space, he gets up and he gets himself into a position. Two things about his position are key, and this is a beautiful thing I've talked a little bit about before we started about zooming the lenses and picking a fixed lens. A fixed lens made him get into the right spot in the stadium, but it's surrounded by all the crowd. Using the tilt shift has blurred the faces, which is wonderful. But he also got into this position for another reason, aside from aesthetically it was right. He knew that I think this is Anna Kournikova, don't quote me on that. He knew that her family was in a box over here, and he knew the habit of when a tennis pro would win, they always turn around to their family and are like, yeah, $5 million now. But they're like, yeah, I just won. So he knew that she would turn around if she won, and that's another reason he placed himself into that position. So very strategic and a great use of the rule of thirds. And he's cool. He did video work as well. First guy to make a video of the Canon 5D Mark II into a short movie. He's a real Canon guy, and he just did another movie called Mobius. I gave you guys links on the note paper. You need to check out all these photographers. Okay, so this is a mentor of mine. His name is Sean Kernan, and this is from his secret books. And Sean Kernan is a super cool guy. He teaches classes up at the main workshops, and I highly recommend go on to his, subscribe to his blog and his newsletter. He's a wonderful photographer, and he throws things out to you that are so left field they really make you think. Part of an exercise I'm going to have you do is derived from taking a class with Sean. So on this one, The Secret Books, we've got some simple compositions here, and it just works nicely. Look at the plumb line is right at that top right-hand part of the rule of thirds conjuncture. The book really sits on 2/3. We've got that open area on the left-hand side. Notice we've got 2/3 are light, and then we've got this dark area occupying the top. And then there's a little bit of negative space, positive and negative space happening here. This is positive space intersecting into the negative. We'll talk a little bit more about positive, negative space in a couple more slides. But it's just a good use of seeing rule of thirds. And it's a very nice image. It just works very well. Now, shapes, you always want to keep shapes in mind. And I chose this one and the next image because the shapes are kind of complementary. Look at those round edges up on top, conflicting with the square rectangle of the book. And it kind of works out quite nicely. So what I've got here is a night scene of downtown Seattle I shot from Queen Anne Hill for a tourism magazine based in Seattle. And this was a little challenging. And why I say it was challenging, first off, this was shot with film, slide film. That's why the image is very warm. I didn't have an automatic white balance to correct. I would have had to use filters or special film. But what we've got is that we have a dark area right on the bottom. This area is a suburban or a residential area that's in front of the Seattle Key Arena, and the Key Arena is here, and then the beginnings of Seattle Center, and then we've got downtown Seattle. So I used this dark area just to make a simple little frame for the image. But then I had this wide open sky up on top, and it was a slow shutter speed, so you can see the clouds that were at higher altitude are blurry because they were moving a little bit faster. But the thing that was important here was the Space Needle. Now the Space Needle is not directly in the center of the picture. Space Needle is knocked over just ever so slightly. Problem with putting it in the center is that if I put it in the center, it would have blocked up the composition very poorly, and the bright lights of the Key Arena over here would have created too much highlight and would have drawn the eyes a little bit. So I decided to crop this. You can see some of the features of the Seattle Center over here. These are kind of famous archways. And then we've got the Space Needle, which is really important. And then back over here is the Columbia Tower, which is known as the box the Space Needle came in. But let's look at some rule of thirds going on here. A dramatic shape can override the rule of thirds. So even though I didn't put this over here or up on top or there, I didn't want to do that because it wouldn't have made sense for the shape and to really show the city from that vantage point. So it's off in terms of a rule of thirds, but I discovered that you can be off a little bit as long as you just avoid that center line that's right in there. This is too dramatic of a shape to put right in the center line. But if you put it slightly off to the left or right, it creates a little bit of balance. Now, I kind of did what I thought was right from my art training and made this image. And I hadn't thought about it too much until I started researching images to put this presentation together with. But one thing that I really want to emphasize is horizons. And everything I've been showing you so far, I've been talking about horizons. Horizons you want to place on the first third or the top third. Never split your image in half. Never dissect don't let a horizon split the image in half. That is a big rule to composition. So I want to talk to you guys about something, and you've probably all been there. You go to a beach or you go to a large lake. You're standing on the beach, you've got your camera in hand, and you look out at the scene and you're like, wow, this is beautiful, I got to capture it. So you hold your camera up. Do you aim your camera up a little bit and get 1/3 of the landscape and the water in front and get 2/3 of the sky? Or do you aim down and get 2/3 of the water in the surf and 1/3 of the open area, the sky in? It's a quandary that's been bugging us forever. So what we've got to do is when we get into this is look and find out what's most interesting. If it's the surf and it's a crashing surf, then maybe we want to boost up the shutter speed very high so that we can get the crisp water as it's hitting the rocks. Or maybe we want to soften that by taking the shutter speed and dropping it low so that we put the camera on a tripod and we get a smoothness of the surf coming in and out, and then we only get 1/3 of the sky. Or maybe we have cool clouds going on in the sky or a nice looking sunset, and in that case we have good colors. We want to aim up for the for the actual sky. So there, when you're determining the horizon, the image is going to give you clues and tell you what's most interesting about it. Now, for those of you with digital cameras, you can always take one picture with the horizon towards the top and one picture with the horizon towards the bottom and figure it out later on. But pretty much there's going to be things that are in the picture to help you make that choice. So take a look at the subjects in front of you and how complex they are. So when I was thinking about putting this collection together, and I want to show that Seattle image, I made that decision. But there's a guy who came before a lot of us here, Ansel Adams. And Ansel Adams, I want to say, is one of the master photographers. You talk the top 5 greatest photographers, Ansel Adams is always in there. This is a guy that gave us many gifts in photography. He gave us the zone system so that we could meter properly, which all the multi-segment, multi-zone evaluative meters built into today's cameras are a nod to Ansel Adams' zone system. So this is one of his most famous images, Moonrise over Hernandez. And the story with this one is that Ansel is zipping by on his truck. He looks out, he sees the moon, he sees the church, he sees the graveyard, and he's like, wow, that's a great image, but it's a windy day and the clouds are moving around quite heavily, quite fast with the wind. So he gets out his camera and he forgets his meter, so he guesses his exposure. Guesses his exposure, vastly underexposed. When he does the negative, he files the negative away and says it was a failure. About 7, 8 years later, he finds the negative again and says, you know what? This is a cool image. He goes into the darkroom, he applies all his skills that he has, and he creates one of his most iconic images. Aside from Half Dome in Yosemite, this is one of his big ones. So let's just investigate it and see what's going on. First off, we've got the horizon where? First third, bottom third. He doesn't cut the horizon in half. Then he places that moon not exactly into the center of the picture. He knocks that important feature of the moon just off of the center. Again, creating a balance to the image, creating a dynamic nature to the image. I was really happy when I kind of restudied this image and said, same thing with the Space Needle. You can't take something really important and stick it square in the middle of the image. But sometimes it's important that it's there because look at this down here. He needs to keep this there. So Ansel can't get the moon to move for him. The moon moves on its own, or we move around them, or the moon circles us on its own. So he can't wait, because if he waits, the light is going to change. We've got this really dynamic nature from that late sunset happening over here. So what he does is he just knocks it slightly over to the side, and it works. So a dramatic shape that's in the middle of your composition, if you can't get it into one of the corners, just put it slightly off center from the center line that's in your image, and the composition will work. Everybody having fun? Okay. Okay. Again, one of his more seminal images and one of his famous images, and I want you all to know that this image was a failure when he created it. So never delete your images in your camera, download them to your computer, and who knows, later on you can always go in and maybe fix them with the newest version of Lightroom or Photoshop. The way that he did this negative is he took the negative and treated it in Farmer's reducer, which built up the density, and he did it over a period of a couple of days and really built the negative back up. Okay, so what we've learned so far is don't split the image in 2, split it in 3. That 3 just keeps coming, and it does. During the entire 2 hours, it's going to keep happening. Really important for that 3. Okay, moving on. 3 also manifests itself in many more ways. This is a shot of Mount Rainier in Washington, and every image you should hopefully try to convey a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. It's the 3 points to a photograph, and this is where we go beyond the rule of thirds. And I really want to impress to you guys, when you're out there shooting, always try to identify a foreground. Foregrounds are so important because foregrounds give perspective, they give more information to the viewer on the story that's being told, they tell a little bit more about it. So the 3 shows up in that way. Be cognizant of this. If you're shooting flowers, it's okay to put a flower out of focus in the foreground and then let the other flowers be there. Or if you're shooting a view outside of a window, maybe try to capture the window sill or the window shades and also what's outside of the window. Try to incorporate foreground. We're going to see a little bit more of this. So this is another Ansel Adams Yosemite shot, and I just want to go back and say that here's my crummy picture of Mount Rainier, and here's the incredibly dynamic Ansel Adams. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing with an 8x10 camera. But on this one, we've got the lower areas of the mountain has the snow still on it. But as we get into the more spires of the mountain, this is scree, and the scree can't give purchase for the snow, so it ends up being dark. And then we've got that super dramatic sky going on in the background. So there's 3 layers to this image, and it becomes very pleasing to look at, very dynamic to look at. This is Michael Kenna again. This is the Ratcliffe Power Station series. This is Michael Kenna does a lot of night work, and this is a really cool image. And on this one, when we look at it, it's pretty easy to see. We've got the foreground are these trees, and being that it's a night shot, he's using a great trick of doing the profile through the trees. So we got the dark trees and then a white background, so we can see a silhouette. Looks really good. Second area is the actual power stations itself, and then the background, the dark sky in the background. So we've got a foggy night, we've got ground light from the power reactors, creating a very moody image. And then probably, what do you guys think is over here? If we had night vision and we could see what's over here. Probably parking lot too. I mean, it could be parking lot, it could be bushes, something not interesting. So what's cool about this is he decides this isn't interesting, but this up on top is interesting. So he makes his meter readings for right in that top area, the gray, so we can capture the highlights here, very dark shadows, and then beautiful gray tones right in the center. And this is positive and negative space we're going to be talking a lot about very soon, going in between. Has anyone ever seen power stations, nuclear facility looking so beautiful? No, it's pretty cool stuff. Got to look into Michael Kenna. He's an incredible artist. Okay, here's another example of, we've got an extensive foreground. The foreground gets very complicated. Then we've got an important subject in the middle ground where it gets complicated, very tight together. You lose details here, they're so close together. And then we've got the background. So I shot this outside of a hotel window in Paris. It's looking up at Montmartre? Sacré-Cœur, and that's, right, Sacré-Cœur, and that's Montmartre, right? Yeah. So this was a tough one because I liked the scene a lot. And what I really loved about it were these clouds. The clouds to me were very impressionist. And since I was hanging out in Paris, you know, when in Rome, when in Paris, act like an impressionist. So I really want to get them. But I had this problem again. This isn't exactly right in the center. It's off a little bit. It was this dome that bothered me. It was so big that I could de-emphasize it by cropping it just a little bit, and it kind of mimicked it over there, so it worked. Also, these lines that were happening over here kind of worked out. And then just to give an added treatment to this, in Photoshop using Nik Edge, it's part of Nik's software package. Auto Edge, thank you. And it just did the edge, it just made it a little to keep in theme with the impressionist area. Now, I'm very happy for this image, and let's just quick show of hands. Do people, as far as a postcard, do we like this image? Yeah. Okay, it's a technically beautiful image. Shot with a Canon PowerShot S70. The S70 was a, now we have the S100, but the S line is a point and shoot Canon camera, small sensor, but it did have the ability to shoot RAW. So I was able to really get the color exactly the way I liked it. And I made a beautiful 13 by 19-inch print of this. So having a point and shoot camera in your arsenal, very important. You never know when you're going to see something that looks really good. But again, though, just real quickly, just talk about it. We've got 2/3 of all the city itself, and then 1/3 is the skyline. It just kind of works out, and there's a balance that happens in the image. So I asked you guys if you liked that photo. And I want to deconstruct photography a little bit. We're going to get into, Roland Barthes is a photography historian and a philosopher, a French guy, and I recommend that you check out his book. His book is called Camera Lucida. I don't know if I put this on the notes, but you want to write that down. Camera Lucida you can get in softback for like $8 or $9 at the Strand bookstore. You can find on Amazon probably for $4. But it's very important. It's a great SI book. Very little imagery is in there. It's more talking about photography. And what he does is that he breaks down and he deconstructs images into 2 categories, studium and punctum. And this is the core of the lesson today, is to understand studium and punctum. I'm a big fan of this. So we start off with studium. Studium is a Latin word, and it means a general liking. It means a small intellectual commitment to the image. Let's go back to that shot of Sacré-Cœur and Paris. We liked it. The colors were nice, the clouds were nice, it was evocative, it was Paris, the architecture looked cool. We paid attention to it and we decided that we generally liked it. So I've got 3 other examples of some studium. First one is in the Secret Garden. That is a garden that's in the West Village. And again, these, I want to just point out real quickly, we've got these branches, the foreground, turned it into black and white. It's a nice shot, right? It's clean, it looks good, it's simple. This is a simple shot of the of Grand Central Station. And I think what's cool about it historically is that there's flip camera advertisements on it. For those of you that are techno geeks, flip camera has been discontinued and no longer around. Cell phones destroyed the flip camera. The flip camera was one of the most brilliant pieces of technology that existed for the shortest amount of time. There was HD video camera that fit in the palm of your hand. But we've got nice vanishing point. We've got these cool lines happening. It's interesting, it's trains. And then this is the quintessential picture of the of Grand Central Station. You go to the balconies, which are on both sides. You put your camera on the balcony, you're set up on a tripod, put your camera to shutter preferred and let it shutter hang open for 5 seconds or 3 seconds, and you get all the busyness of the people running around. So these are studium. I mean, we generally like these images. Each one has something to offer us, and it's cool. But when you walk out of here, you're probably gonna forget these images, except for this picture, because this picture you've all seen before, right? I mean, everyone shot that one in Grand Central. And if you haven't, I recommend going to Grand Central and shooting it because it's a fun shot to make. So that's studium, it's the general liking. But what we're really looking for is punctum. Punctum is Latin for punctuation. Punctum is that 1-2 punch that really an image leaps out and grabs you. So the first one I want to show you is Louis Cinco. This is the Marlboro Marine. This is one of the most famous images to come out of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, the recent wars that we've been involved in. What happened on this one is that Louis shoots this one of the Marlboro Marine. His name is James Blake Miller, and he just got done with a very intense firefight. This is in Fallujah. It was taken in 2007. We know what was going on in Fallujah 2007. This poor guy had seen his other teammates been blown up, heavy duty. He's got post-traumatic stress disorder, and it becomes this very important picture. And you can see, where's the punctum on this one? Well, the punctum is in his eyes. We know what this guy went through without having to be told what he went through. I mean, he's obviously been through a pretty heavy-duty firefight, and it's got us a big punch. This appeared in over 150 magazines in 2007 and was a very important image. This is Elliot Erwitt. Here's just a lighter subject. Elliot Erwitt, we love him. He's a guy who can inject humor into anything. I just wanted to show contrast here. I love this one because you get a delayed laugh on it. You know, the first thing we notice on this one, the punctum is this little guy, right? Look at that face. It's great. His little feet, the boots, and then, whoa, what's going on over here? So what kind of feet is that? Well, this is a multi-layered image. We've got a horizon that's out there in the background. We've got this 2/3. These guys are sitting right in the rule of thirds. It's perfect image, and it's complicated because what's going on over here? Is that a Great Dane standing next to the person? Is there a ostrich there? Is there a dog? What's going on? So it's got punctum, and again, those eyes are always a big indicator. You got the googly eyes of the little dog, or we've got the stressed out eyes of the Marine. This was a shot that I'm working on a project now called Battlefield Can't, and I'm taking an 8x10 view camera and I'm going to the battlefields of Northern Europe, and I'm shooting the battlefields, and then I'm intersecting prose and verse from the veterans who fought there. So this is inside of a church in Saint Marie du Mont, and I'm walking through the church. It's very quiet, and I find the statue of Mary that's encased in glass, and there's a bullet hole in it, and it's a remnant of a firefight that happened. The story behind this is a couple of Germans are hiding in the church, and there's a priest, and the Germans say, "Hide us," and the priest says, "You can hide in the refectory, just don't drink the wine." So the Germans go and hide there. The priest goes out, finds a couple of paratroopers, and he's like, there's Germans in the church. The GIs go in there, the paratroopers go in, there's a firefight, they kill the Germans, and this is what's left 72 years later. So it's kind of important. So I think the punctum on this one is really that bullet hole. And then what adds to the mystery of the whole thing is that, look at Mary with her hand over her chest. It's very evocative, and it kind of works out that way. Out of the the 25 images from my first leg of the trip in Normandy, this is the one that really has that has punctum. The thing about punctum is that you know it when you got it. Punctum doesn't happen so often where you can set up the image. Punctum has to be very spontaneous. So the point here, the interspersion of studium and punctum works out like this. We have to take a lot of photographs so that we get our technique down, composition becomes second nature to us, and we have to understand how our camera works and how the autofocus works. And what happens is that we take a lot of these more or less boring baseline images, these simple images that are out there, and we get really good with these simple images so that we see them, we can practice good composition, we can get good exposures, we can understand the modes in our cameras. But then when something important happens, we got to grab that picture. Do you think that Elliott Erwitt, how long could this be set up for? Elliott Erwitt is probably, he's an old, well, I don't know how old he was at the, he took this photograph, but he's down on his hands and knees making this picture. And dogs, have you ever photographed pets? I have a cat. I swear, my cat, I hold up a camera and my cat like walks away. You know, he could be doing the coolest thing, he's looking at me, his tongue sticking out and the eyes, and as soon as I hold up a camera, he's like, oh, I'm done. You gotta be fast with him. Now this one, as far as a journalist goes, does a journalist have to be fast with their camera? Because do you think this guy's gonna hold this shell-shocked look? No, he's gonna probably turn around and move around quickly. Now when punctum happens, you gotta be ready. And the only way to be ready for punctum and to get those once-in-a-lifetime pictures is to be trained really well and know your equipment. You never know when punctum is gonna present itself. You can only be ready for it and get ready to make that great picture. Now, how many images in your life are gonna have punctum? Not a ton. Okay, so we have to practice and make lots of boring but practice studium and good correct pictures so that when we have the opportunity for punctum, when we're up visiting Niagara Falls and all of a sudden that guy with no shirt on and a barrel goes floating by, you'd better have your camera ready to go and make that picture. But if you're not trained well, you're going to be like fumbling for the picture out of your camera bag that you're not so familiar with. You're going to whip out the camera and it's going to be set for a low shutter speed. It's going to be a blurry image and not work out and yada, yada, yada. So punctum is the gifts that we get that are unreliable. We don't know when they're going to show up. We just have to be ready for them. Okay, that being said, I've been babbling quite a bit about positive and negative space. Now, positive and negative space was the lessons that I really learned from George Bates, my art teacher, and I love the guy for this. So we're going to look at Henry Bresson. Bresson, again, top 5 photographers that ever lived. Bresson was the man. Bresson gave us a gift as well, and that's the essence of the moment. The essence of the moment is when everything, when double punctum occurs, when that moment is just perfect to take the picture. That's what Bresson gave us when you click that shutter. And Bresson worked with a Leica M2 and M3 camera, which didn't have a power drive on it. This wasn't your Canon 3 Ti, which is 4.5 frames per second. This was click, and then he had a double stroke, so he'd have to stroke it once and then stroke it twice. So this guy was not shooting so fast. But I want to show you positive and negative space here. This is a great one. So this image has 2 things going for it. First off, it's got great positive and negative space. This is where the negative space intersects the subjects, which are usually residing in the positive space going on. So positive space are all the kids, and the negative space is the ceiling around them. The interesting thing about this is that notice how the kids are more densely packed as we get deeper into the photo, but they're more sparsely packed down here as we lead into the image. It's genius. It just works really well. Positive and negative space makes our eyes go in and around the image, and it makes our eyes dance and read the image very properly. So what we've got with the negative space here is that he separates them and gets them a little bit more distance here. The other thing that's going on here is a beautiful thing that we can incorporate into our photographs, and they happen ever so not often, so infrequently, and it's a spiral. If we can incorporate a spiral into our image, you've done something wonderful. Now, spirals are cool things, and why spirals are cool things is that spiral happens in nature naturally. I don't know everything, but I do believe that a spiral happens because of the gravity. So if you were to look at, like, let's say the way a snail develops its shell, there's a spiral. I believe that has a lot to do with gravity. The way that honeycombs are designed by honeybees, they have these spiral that happens inside of it. It's all has to do with our world and our rotations and our gravity. So I believe that The spiral is hardwired into us. If you were to break down us into cells, what do our DNA look like? It's a spiral strand. So I think that we identify with that on such a core level. So if we can get a spiral into our pictures, and I'll show you one or two more spirals as we go forward, you've done something really wonderful. Now this is one of Bresson's best known images, and what we've got going on here is a beautiful example of positive and negative space. The reflection in the water is the negative space. The subject of the guy making the jump is positive space. And then we've got this interesting point here up on top. Notice 2/3, 1/3, so we've got the foreground, middle ground, background. That all works. Foreground, the middle ground, and then the ceiling is the background. So what happens here is he anticipates this jump from this guy making the jump from where the flooded area is. So he goes into a location, he sits there patiently with his camera, and he waits for something to happen. And he's really good with that Leica, has no delay. You guys ever use a point and shoot digital camera from about 5, 6 years ago? You know, you're like, click. You know, they're getting better. They're much more responsive now, but they're getting better. But this is a great example. When his camera, Bresson's camera, when he hits that button, it's a Leica. It shoots very quickly. So positive and negative space is easily shown out to you guys. And you want to try to find positive and negative space and put that into your pictures, ingest that into your pictures. So let's just look at these two images. This is shot with a lens baby. For those of you that aren't familiar, a lens baby is a really cool device. It's a lens that attaches onto an SLR camera, and the front element can rotate and it can shift and it can move around. And what it does is it creates a sweet spot. So the sweet spot here is in this area, and this is the lens baby bendy funkiness, the attribute of the lens. So I can move that around a little bit. I can move the sweet spot around into different spaces. It's a pretty cool thing. I'll show you a few more of those. So which of these two do you think has better use of positive and negative space? For those of you that think that this image over here, please raise your hand. Okay, so we got 2 people. And everybody else, you guys think that that's a better one over on this side? Okay, so what the reasoning is here is that I do believe that this one has better positive and negative space in it. The reason why is if we were to look at this image over here, I shot this one first, shot it with the lens baby, and what bothered me was that these leaves touched the building in Madison Square Park. So what I did was in my camera, I engaged the chimp mode. Are you guys familiar with the chimp mode in your camera? Okay, so for those of you who don't know the chimp mode, that's when you take a picture and you hit the play button and you look at this picture and you go, ooh, 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 ooh. Especially if you show. If I take a picture, you're like, ooh, 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 how cool. It's called the chimp mode, but we're laughing, but seriously, within digital photography, a new word is chimping your camera is known as reviewing your images. So what I do is I take the picture and I chimp the camera, and I notice that these leaves are touching the building. So what do I do to rectify the problem? Looking at the picture, I literally just go one step, recompose the picture, and I'm much more happy that one big step just created this nice positive negative river that goes through the picture. And I like to call this a river because here's the land, here's the shore, and here's a river of negative space just going through that nice blue. And I think that that's a little better picture. Now for those of you that raised your hands, there's always 1 or 2 people in every class I give that thinks the other one was the better picture. So that's okay. It's, you know, this is all your eye, it's all subjective. You found that to be the better one. I have just one question for you two. Did you think it was a better one because you liked the fact that that greenery touched it, or did you notice that, or were you just, was a lucky guess? You raise your hand on that other image? This one? Who liked this one? I saw it, okay. Was it, did you notice that happening there? So you kind of liked it. I agree with you in a way that it could be right, because what it's doing is it's touching, and touching, it changes the dynamic nature. So I'm not saying that that this is the be all end all, but in terms of my vision, it bothered me. I want to create that perfect likeness that goes through. This is a shot with the lens baby in Madison Square Park of the Flatiron Building, and I remember making this one. I was really walking around just in a 10-foot area to get this one perfectly composed, and ended up being a chapter inside of the composition book. It was the chapter header image they chose because it's just compositionally so right. It just kind of works out nicely. Look at the highlights that just appear from the sun setting on it. And then these act as a framing device. It just frames the image just right. And using the lens baby pushes the viewer up into the sharp area, because you don't really look at out of focus areas, you look at the sharp areas. So it kind of directs the viewer around a little bit. Okay, some more examples of positive and negative space. This is a view, this was taken inside of a speakeasy. This is an after hours place in Seattle. Seattle had a 1 a.m. strict liquor laws. At 1 a.m. the bars would shut down. Us New Yorkers, we can party up till 4 a.m. In Seattle, 1 a.m. everything shuts down. So they had a thriving speakeasy culture. Goth in the Box was a really small club, about literally half the size of this room. And what they would do is they would take the promoters would take a parachute and put it up against the wall and put some lights behind the parachute to create a little bit of environment. This is taken with a Konica Hexar camera with P3200 T-Max film. This was pushed to 6400 ASA. This was a black and white grainy film. And I knew it was too dark in there to actually get details of the subjects. So what I did was I got a meter reading on the background and just shot all night long. The cool part about this, I always love that the dance happens here. In the dance, the guy's hair is flinging out from the dance. And look at that, even though they're silhouettes, what kind of a jacket is he wearing? It's the classic biker jacket, exactly. You can see that buckle that's on the biker jacket. So I like that even though it's dark in a silhouette, there are clues to help you understand what's going on. Also, it's Gothic dance. Notice the hat, the very elegant hat that the woman's wearing. This is Fireball Bill. This is from the Seattle Suspects series. Fireball Bill is a contortionist fire breather. When bands would come to town, he would perform on stage with them. I don't know if you guys ever heard of My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, but he used to tour with them. So what's going on here with Fireball Bill, great positive and negative space. Now you remember before I told you that I used to kind of rip off Avedon quite a bit. This is what's called a high key shot. When I shoot in the studio, I like to shoot with on a white background, and with the white background be able to really accentuate the subject. And I'm a big fan of positive and negative space. This is an actual fiber print from the series. This is that shot, and this is IO Electro. And with this one, I want to encourage a dynamic pose that happens with them so that their arms are out. One of my other heroes is Helmut Newton. I'll show you some images from Helmut later on. And Helmut Newton, I saw one time a video of him, and he said that he liked to pose his models like a spaghetti western. And he would get his models to pose like they were at noon doing a gunfight because their arms would be out and they would be very expressive. So I remember that, and I always tried to infuse that in the studio and get all this attitude coming out. The cool thing about IO Electro is that we've got negative space within the positive space. So here's the negative space, all the white background, but then I love that circle on her because it creates a double layered kind of an image that's double layered. You got to really go in there. Same thing kind of happens with Fireball Bill with the way his jacket is cut open. It creates a nice arrow. And that arrow here, look how the arrow contrasts the arrow coming up down here. This is all strategic. This is moving back and forth with the camera and analyzing, trying to find rivers of positive and negative space and trying to work it. And once you start to master positive and negative space, your images become more complex. They make the eye dance around the image a little bit more. So I've been talking about looking at the eye and making it, where does your eye go when you look at an image? Well, the eye will dance around the image and it will read the image and see certain things. More complicated compositions have better maps built into the image for your eye to dance around. So in the Western world, we tend to read from left to right. And I think that our minds are kind of hardwired to start from the left to the right. So usually when you look at an image, you're always starting at the left and you're moving into the right. It's just one of those things that's hardwired into us. I questioned if that was actually true, that hardwired into us, and thought that maybe it was because of muscle memory from reading. And then I looked around, a lot of my coworkers here at B&H that read Hebrew read from right to left. So that didn't quite work out. So then I went and I saw a beautiful show in Rome on a Japanese painter named Hiroshige. Hiroshige was he worked in Kyoto, worked in Tokyo, which before it was called Tokyo, it was called, not Kyoto, that's another area. What was it? Togago? Was that? So it was early Tokyo, and it was really before the Western world had much of an influence. I looked at his paintings, and it was like that he met Giotto. It was pretty amazing. So he kind of, even Japanese, which go, they don't read left to right or right to left, they read up and down. So I figured, well, this guy, this totally debunks my theory of muscle memory with eyes. So I think that it's hardwired into us that we start from the left and we work our way in. So first thing we've got is directional elements. Second thing we have are anchor elements. Directional elements will keep us moving around the image, but anchor elements will stop us at certain parts of the picture as our mind processes what we're looking at. So within directional elements, we have physical lines. Now, physical lines can be the shapes of the Ratcliffe Power Station that are going on. The other part of a physical line could be the ocean, or the lines that were in the car in the Elliott Erwitt shot, or the dance floor. Then there's spatial lines, which are those positive and negative rivers. Spatial lines happen with wide open white areas and then shadow areas. Highlights and shadows will also cause us to go into directions, because we can have a shadow mass that has a shape and it leads us into another part of the image. Or it can be a highlight that makes our eyes go to this highlight image and direct it along, like maybe highlights that are in the form of an arrow or in a pointy will cause us to move around the image. The other one are spatial futures, and this one, I'm very excited about spatial futures. Even that guy in the Bresson one jumping over the water, we knew where he was going to land, where the image was going to continue moving. Even though he wasn't in that area yet, he was moving towards that area. Now, the anchor elements cement us into an area, and our eyes will stop on the anchor for maybe a millisecond or two, but they'll certainly stop and look at it. So what do? Subjects. Subjects are really important. We stop to look at the subjects. We have to figure out the subjects. Io Electro, did you guys notice the look in Io Electro's face? It was an interesting looking face. She had great makeup on. She looked very otherworldly. Fireball Bill as well. Weird looking guy. He was a subject. You had to stop and figure him out. You had to be like, what's going on with him? Boy, girl, what's the deal going on? Objects. Did you guys notice what was in Io Electro's hand? It was a gun. What kind of gun was it? Okay, well, our mind, as we look at it, we have to figure out what kind of gun it was. It was actually a toy gun. It didn't look like it didn't exist. But our minds had to kind of stop at that and look at it. Because in our, in your visual library, 357s, Colt 45s, we kind of know the iconic guns that are out there. But when we saw the toy gun, we stopped at it and tried to process what's going on. Does this exist? Is it real? So objects will cause you to stop. The roulette wheel, the hands by the roulette wheel, cause you to slow down and look at the images. Now, highlight and shadow masses will also be an anchor element, because when there's a bright area, your eyes are always drawn to bright areas, and your eyes tend to avoid shadow areas. Now, this is pretty interesting, and I have a great little exercise for you guys to try out. This is a tough one. I think it's a cool photographic exercise. In this room, I want you to look around this room, and I want you to find the darkest area of this room. Where is the darkest area of this room? There's a lot of ambient light that's floating around here, and your eyes are pretty used to it. What are you pointing at? The blackness of the TV underneath it?
Projector in the cavity.
Up on top of here, it's very dark. Yep. Also, this area here is kind of dark. Up there, it's kind of dark. So here's my exercise for you. When you leave the event space and you jump on the subway to go home, or you continue on your journeys, and you have a moment, I'd like you to stop, and instead of looking at the brighter areas, which your eyes will naturally go to, try to let your eyes fall to the shadow areas. Try to find the darkest area and see what resides inside of those shadows. Color masses and splotches. I want you to imagine this shot. It's Fifth Avenue. It's a rainy day. It's 5 in the afternoon. It's rush hour. Everyone's leaving their offices to come home. You're looking up Fifth Avenue. Everybody has the quintessential $3 black umbrella, $5 if it's a downpour. One person has a red umbrella. Where is your eyes going to go? To that red umbrella. I mean, our eyes will always, in a sea of neutral colors, will seek out the vibrant color. So we can use that to put that in the right part of the composition. But that's certainly an anchor element. Okay, whoops. We're going to look at a couple of images right now. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is, I'm going to show you some pictures. And when we go to the picture, I want you to note how your eye looks at the images I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some famous images, and we're going to kind of play around a little bit. So your eye is going to travel around the image, and it's going to see certain things. And just kind of keep track of how your eye goes. Are you ready? Okay. So for most of us, our eyes start off on the left-hand side, and then we circle around. We spin around those bars. And then all of a sudden, what do we stop on? The anchor. We stop on that bicyclist. Yeah, we see the bars, all of a sudden we stop on that bicyclist. That bicyclist is in the perfect spot. Why is it in the perfect spot? Again, this is Bresson. What's Bresson? You know, he knows how to capture the moment. Again, this wasn't a Canon 7D, 8 frames per second. This was a Leica rangefinder. He clicks it at just the right moment. Notice here, there's negative space all around it. It's perfect. If he had got this picture, if I had taken this picture, the bicyclist would have been half obscured by the railway and it would have lost all of its beauty, okay? So it's a cool little image. Then what did our eyes do after it stopped there? It followed this curve, this line back around, and then our eyes kind of checked out the rest of the picture. What do you think the last thing that your eyes did, or what do you suppose it did?
The wall.
Exactly, the wall. These walls are cool because there's architectural elements in these walls. But what these walls do is also push you back into the image. So how did Bresson get an image like this? How do you do something like this? Well, he sits up at this spot and he gets ready because he's a patient man, evidently. He's got his camera ready to go. He's got his eyes to the viewfinder. He's got it all clapped out. All of a sudden, the bicyclist comes by and bang, he grabs the picture. This negative space over here is perfect. It just works out so well. Now, I don't know what his proof sheets looked like. I don't know how many pictures he took before or after this one on this photo shoot. Because, I mean, how did the bicyclist's head not really intersect with the curb? It's just touching the curb. If it was perfect, the bicyclist could have been maybe about 6 inches more down towards the bottom. And there's one more thing. What else does this image incorporate? Spiral. It's got a spiral in there. So he's able to get the spiral, a spiral staircase. It's beautiful. So he's got that spiral. Bresson, 2 spirals. He's winning by 2 so far. Okay, ready for the next one? Oh. One of Bresson's best known images. It is a beautiful shot. Why do we get the, well, what we do on this one is we enter from the left and we go right to that, bang, that face. Look at that expression. That's a beautiful expression. You can't pay a model to give you a look like this. I mean, this kid is proud. First off, he's got the wine bottles. He's got the adoration of the girls, okay? And he's rocking some knickers, okay? The wine bottles, though, in these lines bring us up. After we enter it, we really stop on that face because we got to check out that face. Then we kind of move around the rest of the image. And we notice that the background has beautiful bokeh, out-of-focus highlights going on in the background. Good negative space happening around the bottom over here. But then, I have to ask you, there is a mistake that's happening on this image. He's in the middle. Well, yeah, compositionally it's a little bit rough, but really the big one is over here. The feet have been cut off. Okay, so the feet get cut off. Now this picture always amazes me because there is an organization called the PSA, the Photographic Society of America, and they do these print competitions. We've hosted a couple of print competitions here, and it's where a couple of old guys will sit around a picture and they'll go, well, it's a pretty good image. It's got a good expression on his face. 5 points for that. 5 points for the background being nice and out of focus. Good. But you know what? Cut the feet off of the subject, and it loses the composition. It loses the competition. Yeah, well, this is Bresson, okay? This is a great image. It made a lot of you guys go, ah, and got an emotional reaction. This image has a lot of punctum going on. So bravo to Bresson for doing it. He did make technically a mistake, but when this happened, how do you think he made this image? He must have been like, and just grabbed it. So it's not absolutely perfect. The emotions and the quality of the image overrides that slight mistake. Okay, you ready for the next one?
What about the angle of the wall of the building?
You know, it's opportunistic, the angle of the wall. It's a good point. It's a little bit off. I think, though, it lends itself a little bit because we've got lines going in this direction, the wall like that. But he must have shot this one very quickly. He had that camera on his shoulder. He turned around and saw this and grabbed it. And the kid hammed it up for him for 1 second and he got it. But I would be happy to just get the exposure right shooting that fast. But he did. But it definitely has it. So cool stuff. Okay, ready for this one? This is a complicated one. Here it goes. Okay. Very famous image in its day. This is Avedon photographing the model Dovima. Now, Dovima is absolutely beautiful. And Dovima is the Cindy Crawford, Christy Hurlington, Kate Moss, everything wrapped up into the 50s. She was one of the first supermodels. Before there was Twiggy, there was Dovima. So What we've got this one, it's a Dior dress, which is an absolutely beautiful dress, shot with an 8x10 camera. He actually goes out to a circus to make this image. So where does the eye go? Well, again, it starts off with the left. We stop on the girl. Now, why do we stop on Dovima? Because the way the hem in the dress works, it's a white area inside of the gray area. So it's that highlight that kind of gets us in there. And then where do our eyes do? They trail off. And I don't know about you guys, but my eye stopped on that hand just a little bit. And the reason why was just the delicate nature of the hand in front of these behemoths. So it's kind of an interesting little juxtaposition that happens there. And then we kind of rotate around and we have to really check out the texture that's going on the elephants. Elephants have this really textury skin. Dovima, soft and creamy skin. So it's a good little dichotomy. Lastly, that Dior dress is pretty rockin'. Look at the line that just comes right up and it draws you back into the image itself. So it's a complicated image for your eyes, but they kind of just do a little circle and they tend to stay up towards the top where there's a lot going on. There's 3 planes going on. We've got the straw, the elephants fall into the second plane, and then positive and negative space shot up against the tent wall is what links it there. But there's something a little controversial going on here. If you were a PETA person, what would you have a problem with this image? The chains, exactly. One of the last things you see are those chains that are happening on the elephants down here. Now, it's brave to take a supermodel and put her in front of these elephants that are chained up, but these are little details that happen in the image, and you probably saw that last. You know, you were concentrating on the dress, the texture, and the elephants, and it's a super cool shot, but it's complicated. I've noticed with Avedon, his compositions are complicated. You really got to look at them for a little bit to actually see what's going on, and that's why he's a master. Cool shot, wonderful image. He just had a show about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago at ICP, and they had the contact sheets and a whole bunch of photographs from this shoot. It was so beautiful to look at them and see the way the elephants and the trainers must have been working, because there's negative space happening here. We've got one leg up, the other leg down, the leg up. It's a complicated image, and works out really well. Did anyone see that show at ICP? Okay, it was a beautiful show, wasn't it? That was a special show. Okay, I'm going to talk to you guys about image complexity. You may have heard me babble a bit about complexity as we move along. These are 2 of my images, and they both have a complexity built in their own way. So first thing about complexity is environment. Bob Christ, who's a wonderful photographer, had really instilled in me a sense of place. And a sense of place is if you can imbue your image with the environment that it's shot in. So what's going on with this is that, where do we think this image is shot over here? Anyone want to venture to guess? Shout it out. Where's that? Okay, it's a bazaar, it's a street bazaar, but what region is it shot in? What's that? France, okay, so Provence, southern France? Somewhere in Europe. Okay, well, it's actually in Italy. It's in Tuscany. But what are the clues to give it? Look at the architecture. Now, for those of you that said France, good guess, but really Italy, these are Italian colors. These are the siennas that are located in a town next to Siena. These are these beautiful, umber browns, and next to Umbria, they're actually named after these colors. So that all kind of works out. This is definitely not Chicago, right? I mean, it's obvious, you know. So there's a little bit of environment going on there. Now, on the Seattle Suspects, this is a little bit different. This is the exact opposite. My goal with this is literally to remove the environment so that the subject is in an emotionally neutral context. It puts all the attention on the subject so the subject can just speak. I don't want you to know where this was shot. It could have been shot in a studio in Berlin. It could have been shot in a studio in Seattle. You really don't know. The subject is really important. Every image has to have a subject. It's what you lock onto and the story you're trying to tell. So in this case, the subject is really the toys and the environment being the bazaar itself. What stopped me here were these toys. And what I thought was cool about this was that, look at the complexity that happens here. Green, green, we got the 2 reds happening. We've got the negative space around it. And then we've got the third with this stall and then up on top. Now the subject here are really the balls. Now I used the lens baby to put the focus just on the balls. But the cool part about that is, look how those balls are arranged. I didn't put them that way. It almost looks like it was orchestrated, doesn't it? The way that the patterns of the colors work. So that's really the subject there. The subject over here is Sparks. Sparks at the time was a painter in Seattle. Now he's an art dealer here in the city. And the one with Sparks is that he wanted to do an extreme. And then the subject here is this face that's going on, and he's the subject. It's all about him. Take the environment out. I got a couple of lights hitting the super white seamless background. I've got a big light hitting him here, and I got a little strip light for fill light over there. Okay, the elements that are going on. So the elements on this one are the balloons itself are a part of an element. Also, these lines from the curtains facing down kind of keep you looking at it. But one cool element here is, look at this little triangle of blue sky that's up in the top. This one gives us it's summer, it's nice out, it's a clear day. It's a nice little element that happens. And I could have cropped that out, but I like the blue there and working with the blues that are over here and the blue there. It's a color that's injected in it, and it kind of makes the image, kind of adds to the image. Now the elements over here, let's talk about them for quite a bit, because this picture is definitely constructed. So he shows up, Sparks is a character. I hear a crash in my studio, and he comes rolling into the studio with this really heavy duty, this is like the real deal bucket. You know, this isn't like the light bucket. This is the rolling, crunching. He comes in, he's got the outfit, the mop, and he's got ready for the photo shoot. He goes into the bathroom, he changes, and he comes out. So what we do here is these paper towels, to incorporate good positive and negative space, I take a wire coat hanger and bend it in just such a way that it just fits into this space here. So I don't just put this down on the ground. I want this to create positive and negative space intersection. Over here, don't think that this was luck. This was tilted in just the right way so that these elements can just interspace and cause your eyes to move around it a little bit. All this part here, I didn't want you to read this so much, so it's bent back a little bit. Like to show the tat. And also another element is that tank top that he's wearing. That's like, if I was a janitor, I would wear a tank top like that. I mean, it kind of fits in there. One more thing, can you tell me what's going on with him in that expression?
He's mocking somebody.
It's that cigarette, that dangling cigarette. Nothing says attitude like a dangling cigarette. So he's got that going for him, and that's all part of the element. The cigarette's not lit, but we just have it strategically dangling at that moment. So those are elements that are within it. You want to try to find and incorporate as many elements as possible. So this is the fruit. This is the cool-looking antique, and on the fruit stand, the cool-looking antique scale that's there. This is the weird-looking fruit lady that's there, or the fruit guy. This is the little poodle that's in the background. Try to put all these elements as you can into your image to make something with some real gut on it. Now, emotion. This one, in many ways, you could say lacks emotion. This is a tranquil scene. There's no people that are walking in front of me. The Italians are very polite. There's a gaggle of Italians over here waiting for me to get done taking the picture, but they see this big American staying there, carefully focusing with this lens baby contraption, and they kind of stay out of the picture. But on this one, the emotion is great. Look at him. He's got a lot of attitude going on. It kind of fits. You know, he could have been a great lawyer or could have been a great musician. Instead, he ended up being a janitor. So the emotion really comes out. And he's a ham, so he's playing it up. And he's got his eyes shut and his brow furrowed, kind of works. The other big one here, and this is really important for you guys to try to get in there, is gesture. Gesture is all important. Gesture is, look at the hand. To show the tenseness of it, you can see the tendons in his hand because he's grabbing it really well. Gesture is when you can incorporate hands or movement or something into the picture. Do you remember the Elliot Irwin one with the girl in the silhouette of the door? Her foot was just up in a nice little gesture. Gesture can be the kiss. Gesture is when humans do something, and that creates a lot going on into the picture. See if you can get that gesture. Gesture can be the look in the eyes. It could be the way hands come together. And I was just thinking of a famous shot of a black baby and a white baby intermingled together, and their hands are holding each other. Gesture usually happens at the hand. If you can incorporate that, you're going to make a much stronger image. That's like a really big deal to be able to get that gesture in there. Any questions on image complexity before we move on? We're rolling right along. Yes?
You say gesture is in his legs, where it seems
Yeah.
messed up by his knee?
Yep. That's definitely part of gesture. It's body language, absolutely. That's there, the hand, the look in the face, the eyes, the furrowed brow. That's all gesture. Gesture is anything that a human could really imbue into the image. Yes.
Did you wait for that lady in the blue dress to look up?
Over on this side?
Or was that just pure coincidence?
She was the only one that was there. It was, you know, I'm surprised I made this image because I go every year. We go every year to Tuscany, and that's in Cortona. And that same vendor puts the same bucket of balls in the same spot. And I sit there every year and I just look at it the first Saturday that we go to the market. I'm like, I can't believe it's still there. I photographed that in 2005. It's still there. I kind of waited a little bit and I had to fool around with that camera. I believe in slowing down to take photography. So it kind of worked out. She didn't turn around. It worked that her back is to me. You know, this one, this doesn't really have gesture. This is more the other four, but the other images have gesture when there's humans in there. Yes?
Can you comment on the lack of separation between his head and the model? What were you thinking there?
You know what, I wasn't, you know, I guess I got everything right. I could have, there had been an inch difference there. It could have been a little bit better. I'd have to look at the proof sheets. Maybe there was one that happened, but other things didn't happen. But he was just like, when I shoot in the studio, I give you a little bit of direction and we kind of keep shooting and there's a rhythm that happens. And he was holding it, I think, because it was tight and he was holding it tight to him. This is what I was concentrating. I wanted this to be perfect. That he was moving around a little bit and that picture rose to the top. Okay, big one here is, does it tell a story? Does the image have a voice? And this one, Sean Kernan really dragged it. He got me into this one because he got his portfolio reviewed by Elizabeth Modell and she said, does it have a voice? And he kind of got me into this one with the voice. But think about it, is the image alive? What is the image saying? And if it's saying something, what's it saying? But that life that's into an image. Now this is a very important image in the history of photography. This is the cover of Robert Frank's seminal book called The Americans. Now the Americans, every photo book that's out there basically lends itself to The Americans. The Americans is the quintessential photographic monograph. Now let's just talk about Robert Frank for a second here. Robert Frank is an Eastern European Jewish immigrant, and he's leaving Europe. He leaves Europe in, I believe, the late 40s, early 50s. And what's just happened in Europe is that a country tried to commit genocide. There's World War II happening. There was pretty heavy-duty stuff was going on in Europe. So he comes to America, land of the free, home of the brave. We have the Bill of Rights. Everybody is equal, right? He comes from an area where Jews were oppressed, other ethnicities were oppressed heavily. He comes to America, he thinks everything is going to be beautiful. But he comes to America in the 1950s. 1950s, there's some paradoxes going on here, and he sees it very acutely. So what does he do? He gets a fellowship and he travels across America photographing Americans. This book is the bomb. Ladies and gentlemen, who here is familiar with The Americans? Okay, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, you got to go to a bookstore, and The Americans has just been re-released, and trust me, it'll be about the best 30 bucks that you'll spend your money on in photography besides a circular polarizer. The Americans, he travels throughout America. So what do we got? And this becomes the cover of the book. Jack Kerouac writes the foreword to the book, which is really cool if you can get a beat poet to write your foreword to the book. But this is a streetcar in New Orleans. So this is the South in the 1950s. So let's just talk about what's going on here. Actually, let's start with some mechanics. Rule of thirds. 1, 2, 3. Perfect, right? The subjects are all in the right spots. Let's talk about these subjects and the story that it tells. 1950s America, segregation still going on. We've got a very snooty looking woman towards the front of the car because she can sit in the front of the car because she's a white snooty woman. Then we've got these kids here. The interesting things about these kids are the gesture that's going on with the children there. But talk about gesture, talk about the back of the car, segregation America. We've got a black forlorn figure here, and we've got the proto Rosa Parks over here. But again, they're in the back of the car. So Robert Frank escapes this awful Europe where there's lots of prejudice, comes to America, and what does he find? Yeah, all those things that we say, but in the end, the 1950s, we weren't so advanced. And he captures it so beautifully on it, becomes the cover of the book. So it's a very strong image. Evoking story using time. We've got gesture, we've got environment, we've got all these things, subjects saying things and telling us things. But how can we use time? And this is going way beyond the rule of thirds. And this was from spending a week with Sean Kernan. I kind of came up with this time thing. How can we evoke story using time? Well, I did ask you before what time of day you thought that photograph was. But time plays an important role within this. So this is Helmut Newton's tuxedo. It's shot outside of his studio, and it's a pretty cool picture. And what I'd like you guys at this point to do, take out your note paper, and I'm going to let you guys look at this image for a second, and I want you to write down, just in keywords, in single words, you can write down 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 words, where was she 5 minutes before this image was taken? Where was the subject? Where did she come from? Okay. First guess. Shout it out. Where was she 5 minutes before?
Maybe a play.
She was at a party or a play?
After Hours Club.
An after hours club?
Definitely.
Goth in the Box? No, she wasn't a Goth in the Box. She snuck in somewhere.
She was modeling.
She was working, she was okay, well,
And then she came out and they took the picture out of there.
so she was at a photo shoot.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, are you saying that because I gave away a clue? I said it was taken outside of his studio? Okay. Okay, you know.
Because I said it before, she was modeling.
Okay, she was modeling. How about this? She was a British Secret Service MI5 agent, and she was just in a club, and she just made the passed the information off to Agent 007, and she came out afterwards because no other spies caught her, and she's having a cigarette, and she passed off the information. Could it be? Could be. You can't really tell me now. Okay. What we're doing, though, is that we've taken this subject, she's in this interesting area, she's dressed very specifically, and we've thought out, we've given clues to saying what she could have been doing ahead of time. Now, I've heard people tell all sorts of stories at this event space on what she was doing before, that she was a model, she's taken a break from the photo shoot. These are all valid things. But the thing here is that we were imagining things. There are visual clues to help us figure this out, aside from the fact that Helmut Newton knows what he's doing. Let's look at the image a little bit. We got the vanishing point 2/3 up for the horizon. I like how we got 1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights. If he had been 1 foot over, we would have lost this light and just had 2 lights. The guy knows what he's doing. He has 3 highlights going on there. There's a nice gesture and body language happening. She's in the center third of the picture. Her head is up on this part. The light is beautiful that's going on. Okay, so now I'd like you to take out that same piece of paper, and I'd like you to think about, where does she go? After this image is taken, where does she leave to? Where's she heading? She's going back into the club. She made her connection with the spy. She had a quick smoke. She's going back to meet her lover. She's going for more photo shoots. She's got to do a change of clothes. The photo shoot has to continue. If you could incorporate and show it, when we do photography, we always think, click, we made the picture. What happened before you made the picture and what happens after you make the picture? And can you draw that timeline out so that one image can really inform the viewer and can really give them lots of information? That is our goal as a photographer. The best photographers are able to do that, able to extend the timeline. It's not 1/25 of a second, it's a 10-minute picture. I want to show 7.5 minutes before, 1/25 of a second when I take the picture, and then 2.5 minutes afterwards. If we can bring all that together in one image, we've made a very strong image. Okay, let's look at a couple more pictures, kind of play with what we learned here. Where was this picture taken? What's that? Manhattan? If it was Manhattan, name one other city that this picture could have been taken in. Chicago. It's the architecture that gives it away. It's a very simple shot. The lost cloud. How many of us have looked up and seen clouds and maybe photographed them? But when Cortez does it, it's got a certain look to it, a certain feel to it. The geometric nature of the building. The building is done in a deco style. That's all part of it. This is Jennifer Diamond. Jennifer Diamond was one of the founding members of the event space. Jennifer Diamond goes to Mexico, and she's got a Canon Rebel camera and a 20mm 2.8 lens. She looks up and she captures this image. Jennifer Diamond has a degree in psychology, not a degree in photography, yet she captures this very nice image, right? And she does it with 2 simple pieces of equipment, an entry-level camera and a pretty good lens, a non-zoom lens. So what does this picture have going for it? It's got a It's got a spiral in there. She sees the spiral. And just the way that she puts the church and cuts off the bottom area of the church and just keeps this area, pushes the viewer into the spiral, spins around, really good use. Notice that circle isn't exactly in the center of the picture, but it's off by just a little bit. Okay, we can do square compositions. When we look through our viewfinders, we're used to seeing a rectangular image. Almost everything that we've been learning so far can apply to a square image. And I encourage you guys to try some square compositions. They'll really change your imagery and make you think a little bit different of a way. So this is Sig Harvey. Sig Harvey teaches up at the main workshops. She's also an editorial photographer and a fine art photographer. She's represented by Robin Rice Gallery here in the city. I love Sig Harvey's work. She puts herself into a lot of pictures, and she incorporates herself into the imagery, which is something that women photographers, starting with Cindy Sherman, are so good at. We never, we're guys. You ever take pictures of yourself in a self-timer? No, so we don't do that. But guys won't do it, women will. But she does this. So this one, she does take the horizon and cut it in half, which is technically breaking a rule. But putting these power lines up on top overrides that. So she's able to get away with it. Notice here the rule of thirds actually applies here. We've got this rear view mirror, but the cut is 2/3 up. I bet she did that on purpose. Look at the positive and negative space, and there's Sig right over there. But the positive and negative space just comes in. And the red just contrasts with the white. Look over here on the left, we've got this pine pushing the viewer in, yet this area is open here. Now Sig, I know her very well, though her mythology, she sets up her pictures, she takes a long time to make a picture, and she really crafts her picture very well. Sig is not a spontaneous shooter. Sig likes to build up her images, kind of similar to what I was doing in the studio. Build up all the complexity going on. She uses herself in a lot of her pictures, but she doesn't always show herself off. So she goes out and she finds these colors. She's very aware of colors. The yellow dress, the red shoes, and then this whole little body language here. Rule of thirds, she's residing in the central third, but the picture is really broken into 1, 2, and 3. Also on this one's a simple garden shot, but look at the depth of field, that as we look at the garden hose right here and the texture here, and then just gets soft as we work into the background. This is achieved with a technique called bokeh or bouquet. This is a Japanese word, and literally the translation is blurred or fuzzy. But we use bokeh in photography as a terminology to show when I use my depth of field, when I open up the lens all the way and I eliminate depth of field. What's your name, sir? I'm sorry? Hanad is here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photograph of him. I'm going to open up the lens all the way so I get as wide of an open aperture as possible. The background will fall out of focus, and you'll be a little bit sharper, and the attention will be on you. So we can use this tool. Now, if we're using a zoom lens that isn't a fast zoom lens, like a 3.5, 5.6 lens, meaning that at 18 millimeters, it's 3.5, but as I slowly zoom up, the aperture gets smaller, I get more depth of field. So I always have a lot of depth of field. Using a fast prime lens will allow you to achieve some nice bokeh. So this is a shot from the Casa Toscana series, and this is from a bedroom window looking out. So I'm about 5 feet away, and I focused on the shutters, and then look at the background, that softness that is the tree that's across the street. Cool part about the tree is, look at the shape of the highlights coming through the leaves. What is that shape? It's hexagonal, it's not circular. Because what it's doing is it's mimicking the look of the aperture rings that are in the lens. I probably shot this one around 5.6, so the lens is a little bit stopped down, and that shape will happen. When you play with your aperture ring and controlling depth of field, you can make highlights look very similar to what your aperture ring is. It's a really cool little effect that can be done. Now, different lenses will give themselves different bokeh. Who here is a Leica shooter? No Leica shooters in the house? You ever hear a Leica shooter talk about, well, that's a 35 f2.0 Summicron lens. I spent $5,500 on my 50 1.0 Noctilux. They get very finicky about their lenses because Leica lenses usually aren't zooms. They only have one zoom called the Tri-Elmar. It's not really even a zoom. It's just 3 positions you can put the lens in. But those lenses and the aperture have a direct relationship. So playing with aperture on a fast lens gives a really cool look. Sometimes you look at professional photographers and their images pop. You ever notice that? They just have a pop to it. That's because they're working with either fast zoom lenses or they're working with fast prime lenses. So I want to go over the compositional checklist with you guys now, and on my note paper I gave you, I have a copy of this. So when you hold up the camera to your eyes and you're going to make a picture, let's think about choosing your subject, the anchor of your image, the most important part of your image. That's the first thing we want to do. Maybe it's a carousel and there's a particular looking horse on that carousel. That could become the subject and you want to really concentrate on that. The next thing we want to do is we want to locate elements. These are directional lines that lead to your subject or away from your subject. Other things about elements are, be careful if you're doing a picture of somebody and there's a tree in the background, because you run the risk of giving them antlers from the tree. So if I'm taking a photograph of you, I'm going to just aim my eyes around. So right now, I've got you right in the darkness of the aisle. If I shoot you from this angle, I got an eye and glasses growing out of the side of your head. So I'm going to move it around just a little bit. So look at the elements and kind of, you might have to walk around a little bit, your subject, find those directional elements, find the curbs, find the horizons that are going on. Make sure that horizon is in the bottom third or the top third. Don't correct the horizon in half. And then also check your corners, because in your corners, a flaw of composition can be triangles in the corners. So be careful of those triangles in the corners. Make your eye dance around the whole composition that you're doing, and make sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted and you have no triangles in your corner. Last thing to do is be aware of that positive and negative space. Try to utilize it. Try to find those areas where that positive and negative space causes rivers to dance in around your image and can hold and contain your image. Contemplate your picture. Before you take the shot, contemplate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in the world of digital photography. This is where you can buy an 8 GB card and shoot 1,600 images with it. We didn't do that when we shot with film. When we shot with film, we slowed ourselves down a little bit, because every time you took a picture, basically you were going 35 cents, 70 cents, $1.05. So we slowed down. After you'd go to the lab. Remember going to a lab and dropping off a roll of film and picking it up, and it would be like 16 bucks? And then when you came back from a trip and you dropped off 10 rolls of film, and it was, well over 100 bucks you dropped. Digital photography is beautiful. We can take pictures, but slow yourself down a little bit. Make your exposure. Now, what I don't want you guys to do is, when next time you go out taking pictures, I don't want you to be like, this is going to be great. I'm gonna take this picture, and I'm gonna. David says that I should contemplate. I should look for the triangles in the corners. Don't do that. This process that I'm listing should be organic. It should happen in the background. Do you guys think about breathing or your heart beating? No. But when you make images, this should just happen automatically. I've taken so many images within that studium level that I just take the camera and I kind of dance into a composition and then bang out the picture. It just happens automatically. When I'm looking at you, I'm picking that area and I'm going to make that photograph. So this should become natural and organic. It shouldn't be something that you have to slow down and really think about. Maybe in the beginning, if you're just entering photography, yes, but in general, this is going to become something automatic for you. Okay, we have some help. The viewfinder grid. If you have a new modern digital SLR and you check in that manual that came with the camera, you'll find it in the closet in the box that the camera came in. But check your manual and see if you can pull up the viewfinder grid with a custom function. And what it will do is it will dissect the image for you. I think I did that on your camera. I pulled up your viewfinder grid. So if you have problems with your horizons being a little wonky, you can use the grid. If you've got an older film camera, you could buy viewfinders for it and actually insert it into the camera with the grid. And certain cameras, the Canon 7D, the 1DS Mark IV, you can still buy that. Some have it built in, it depends. You can turn that feature on or off, but sometimes you like to have that, sometimes it's distracting. But I would definitely recommend playing with that. It reinforces, what does it reinforce? The rule of thirds, yeah. And also really good for keeping your horizon straight. Okay, I'm not going to talk so much about lenses, but I'm going to tell you this about lenses. A wide angle will help you tell a story. A telephoto will isolate details and bring things that are further away closer into you. So if you were going and photographing eagles in Alaska or on the Skagit River in Washington State, you typically will work with a telephoto lens, because an eagle shot looks really good when you can see that beak and the plumage, and that's how bird photography kind of works. But if you were telling a story about the natural environment that the eagle worked in, you want to have a little bit wide angle and show the tree and maybe a silhouette of the eagle up on top. Two different ways to tell the story. One, you're telling the story, the majesty of the bird, with using the telephoto lens and bringing it in. The other one, you're telling the this story about where you can find it, the brook, the trees. You can tell by the type of tree it is, what location it's in, if there's glaciers in the background. I remember I was in the Czech Republic, I was in Prague, and I was in a square. And this square was like, it was like fairyland make-believe world. At noon, these doors would open up in a building, and these little Pinocchio figures would come out. And it was like so beautiful. That I had to take a telephoto lens and try to zoom in and get really close on that, because that was something very special. But at the same time, I had a wide-angle lens. I took pictures of crowds of people looking up at it and was able to really tell the story about what was going on. So it's kind of cool to be able to work with both type of lenses and work with that. Now, I said this before we started the program to you guys, that the greatest photographs ever taken, and I've shown you some great ones from Ansel Adams and Bresson. Did you see any telephoto shots in some of those classic images? Okay, our instinct is always to like zoom in very closely. Be careful of that. Work with your 18 to 135 millimeter lens, err on the side of 18 to 28 millimeter. The wide angles help you tell stories. Telling stories and the voice of those stories, that's what it's really all about. We also have a video called As Seen Through the Lens on the Event Space channel. You know, we're recording today's video, but if you go to bhphoto.com/eventspace and click a button that says videos, you can scroll through all the videos from 4 years of a lot of things that we've shot here. Alan White's.
Will you repeat that?
Okay, it's our website, bhphoto.com/eventspace. Click on event videos. Take a look for this As Seen Through the Lens. Alan White's taught it, and it's a beautiful 2-hour program about lenses and how to actually see. So talking about how to see, here's a shot with bokeh. It's a tight shot of a window display. Anyone know this window display? They do it every year. It's Paragon on Broadway. It's a sporting goods store. But here's a tight shot, and we're using a little bit of bokeh to really just kind of concentrate on the sneaker. And this is shot in front of everything. So it's the same window display, just looking at it 2 different ways. Composition is all around us. I love just taking my cameras and seeing and just grabbing pictures. This is a good example of studium work. Just simple composition. Line, lines, top third, no admittance. I saw this one, and instead of coming back on the whole park, I like the intersections and I like the building in the background. It's just a simple shot, but compositions are all over. You have to get fluent with it. This was walking through the San Gennaro Festival. The first one, when did I was at San Gennaro. When was I there? This year, right? If you go there next year, you know what the t-shirt's going to say? Okay, so I like these colors attracted me. And the gesture on this one, I really like cutting off this guy's head just a little bit. He's a typical Italian on Mulberry Street. Hey, you want a pina colada? You know, it's kind of got that down. But I like the way his shoulders forward. There's a gesture happening. It's simple. Over here, playing with depth of field and the peppers that they laid out, using bokeh, the out-of-focus highlights. So I went with a wide angle. I shot about 8 inches away from these, focused on that, and let it draw out wide open, and the background gets nice and soft. This one's just kind of silly. Italian girls, I got Italian attitude, all that kind of stuff. Just kind of playing around with those details. But just simple compositional rules. It tells us a little photo essay of I've been going to San Gennaro since 1985, and I like to see the way the differences change. There's been a subtle difference has been happening at San Gennaro every year. It's getting a little better with food, by the way. Okay, so this one, we were scooting up doing pumpkin picking, and I saw this shot, and I stopped. And when I first took the picture, the boat was within the shadow area, and I knew that it was moving, so I wanted to get the barge out of the shadow area. So I took this picture first, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait a second. And then I chimped the camera, made a slight correction, and made this image. Okay, arguably, the exposure is much better on this one. So I was able to correct the exposure. I did my spot meter on this area, and then I got beautiful highlights in the background. But look how I took this picture. This one I shot, and then I waited around 30 seconds and then took this one. Look at the distance that the barge has traveled. Isn't it a nicer relationship to the positive and negative space when it was a little bit further away? So sometimes chimping your camera can really help you out, because you can work. I like to work a scene, work San Gennaro Festival, work this little scene. I love these trees over here. I love those clouds. I love the barge. And then there's one more interesting thing about this. Do you see how the water is very dark or very silty? This was taken not so long after Hurricane Irene came through. And the Hudson River, it does not look like this anymore, but it did for about 2 months afterwards. All the silt had raised up. So there is some complexity happening here that only one guy was nodding his head in his background. You noticed that on the Hudson River from that. It was really a weird phenomenon. When the light hit it, it did it. Okay, so I talked about zoom lenses versus primes. A prime is a non-zoom lens, and the attribute of a prime are two things. They can be less expensive because they're not a zoom, and they're usually faster, meaning that there's a wide open aperture and it lets more light in. So this is shot with a viewfinder camera, and a viewfinder camera, you really have to slow down your pictures quite a bit when you work with a viewfinder, no 7 frames per second. So I'm very carefully cropping and composing, making sure that the triangles, the intersections work. I know I said no triangles before, but triangles are part of this whole image. And it's like a classic image of what you can do with a view camera. This is Katz's Delicatessen, which we heard the rumor that Katz's was going to be closed down. So I had to go and photograph it. Thank the gods, pastrami sandwiches are still sacred. Katz is not going anywhere. Go down and get your pastrami while it's hot. Now, when you work with a prime lens, typically you've got a 14 millimeter lens, a 20 millimeter lens, a 21, a 24, a 28, a 35, a 50, an 85, a 105, 135, and 180 millimeter are your typical prime lenses. Now the 14 to 21s are very wide, but I recommend 24 to 28 is a good wide angle. 50 millimeter 1.8 lens will run you around $119, and if you took pictures with that lens and took pictures with a run-of-the-mill zoom lens, you're going to love that 50 millimeter. The images really pop on it. 85 to 105 is the realm of the portrait. If you do portraits with this, you tend to flatten the nose and the ears nicely, and then 135 and 180 really compresses the image. Now you can do all this with a zoom, which is wonderful, but if you come in close on the foreground and shoot wide open, you're going to see some magic happen with that bokeh that you can achieve with a prime lens. I want to show you guys how to use a camera pan. Camera pan is the way that we can be futurist and we can get movement and action into our image. So what we're going to do is, this was shot in Venice, and I was waiting. These Vaporettos were like taxis. They were going by frequently. So what you do is you take your camera and you're going to set your camera to shutter priority. So you got this little dial. I want you to take your dial out of the automatic mode and put it onto S, which stands for shutter priority. You Canon users, it will say TV for time value. TV and S is the same thing from Canon and Nikon. Put it in shutter priority. You want to start with a shutter speed at a 15th of a second. And then what you're going to do is, as your subjects are going by, as that Vaporetto is going by, or if you want to practice on a New York taxi, stand in front of a cool scene, something that you want to be in the background. Here's where the picture is going to be. Find your moving subjects, and as they intersperse, click the shutter and hold your finger down and then release it. And what you do is you keep a solid movement. So as soon as they hit the background that you want, you've got them locked in, and you shoot and you let go. The important thing to do is to follow through, because it's like shooting pool or playing tennis. If you shoot pool and you go, you don't make a good shot. You shoot pool, you follow through. You play tennis, what do? You don't go, the ball won't go anywhere where you want to. You want to follow through. So same thing when you shoot a pan, you got to follow through. If you follow through, you'll track the subject really nicely. Now the cool part about it is that if you choose a low shutter speed, you really can drag the background nicely. So you start with a 15th of a second, but then you adjust that back and forth. So as a little assignment, we're here in New York City. I want you to walk on the street. I want you to find across the street a good-looking background, and then just wait for the taxi cabs to come. So try to find maybe a dark background so it contrasts with a yellow cab. You'll make some amazing shots. You guys will love it. If you're getting out of focus pictures, you can boost your ASA ISO so that you get more depth of field, so more will be in focus. So that's a little trick you can play around with that. Okay, so I want to go over this image quickly. What time of year was it shot? Spring. Good. It's got that spring look. What time of day? Late afternoon, because you can tell by the color of the light and those lights in the background. Okay, so what we got is the rule of thirds. The kid is in one of the thirds. The other subject is in another third. The horizon's cut in that top third. It's got wonderful positive and negative space going around it, around the subjects. It just works. Tells a story. It's a kid playing in a park. It's a simple story to tell. It incorporates a pan. I got a low shutter speed. The kid's moving really fast, and as the kid's moving around, I'm shooting. grabbing the kid. It's got balanced colors. What attracted me to this was the green on the grass, and then these purples and these pinks that are going on over there. Look at the gesture. The kid's moving really fast, so there's a lot of gesture of the exuberance and energy of the child. Essentially, it's a perfect, simple photograph. Not a great photograph, but it's just a good, perfect photograph. There's a lot of elements happening here. Our goal should be to try to get all these elements together, and we can make some really great, stunning images. This is a great stock image. This is an image that a parks department would buy, that Oshkosh Bagoshkosh kids clothing would buy. It's like a good stock image. It works that way. Tripods. Do we like tripods? Yeah? I don't like them. They're heavy, cost a lot if they're good. They're klutzy, but they're necessary, yeah. Tripods do a couple of things for us. They allow us to use low shutter speeds. So if we want to shoot water moving, get the blur of water, we need a tripod to shoot a 1 second long exposure. You go to a beach scene and there's a jetty and there's a tide coming in, put your camera in shutter preferred, put it on 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and watch magic happen in your picture. Do that to a waterfall. It looks really wonderful. But you got to use a tripod for it. Some cameras, like an 8x10 camera, really needs a tripod, too big to hand hold. So good tripods can be used 3 different ways. The first way is the traditional use of what a tripod can do. 3 legs, it's got a center column, tripod's all set up. But good tripods will allow you to reverse the center column. And when you reverse the center column, you can get what's called a worm's eye view. The lens is literally a ½ inch off the ground. Some will let you break the center column off, and then you could extend the legs all the way so you can get around 8 inches off of the ground. So tripods are actually a little more complicated than you thought. We have a couple of really good guys that work in the tripod department. You can't buy 1 tripod, you really got to have 2. 1 for the heavy lenses and 1 lightweight travel tripod. If you don't want to travel with a big tripod, take a look at the Gorilla Pods. Gorilla Pods are really easy to use. You love them, huh? They're cool. And the Gorilla Pod, I've actually used a 4x5 pinhole on a Gorilla Pod. And a Gorilla Pod will set you back a whopping $22 to $35. So it's not so expensive. But a good tripod will generally run around $100 for an aluminum one. And then we can get an elaborate one that's made of carbon fiber, and they'll be upwards of $300 to $400. But tripods are necessary. I like to buy good stuff, so I only buy it once. My daddy said good things are not cheap, cheap things are not good. So buy a good tripod, and I've had a tripod for 15 years. It's all good. Okay, so what can you do when you're with these cool ones? You can shoot low angle. This is another Michael Kennis shot. Shooting low can be painful, but some wonderful images when you shoot low happen when you're aimed up. I shot this with slide film back in like the 80s, and it's with a Canon lens with a fisheye. And here we've got a really good sweeping worm's eye view, camera's reversed. So these leaves are literally a ½ inch from the lens, shot with Kodachrome slide film. It would have been a great shot, but I didn't have blue skies. If I'd had blue skies, it would have been really cool. The low angle is great. Okay, who here is into heavy metal? Anyone like Judas Priest? Breaking the Law? Great, great album. Anyway, okay. So Breaking the Law is when unorthodox compositions work, and it allows you to put things right in the center of the picture. Generally, really strong subject matter holds up the image. So this is from Jim Vecchi's Center of the Universe, and I have his website on those links you should definitely check out. And what Jim did on this project was he found poles and objects to put in the exact center of the picture. Really cool stuff, isn't it? So he puts this right in the center of the picture, and it's really neat because it breaks laws tremendously. Everything we've been talking about, it's like kind of gone against. Yes and no. There's still elements that are going on here. This one, he took the horizon, it's in 1/3. The way it's got a heavier vertical object here and a heavier horizontal object here creates a balance. This one's one of my favorites. He uses bokeh and the out of focus highlights to blur the background. And notice there's a sign here that would have killed the image if we were reading the sign. But look at this white smoke, the positive and negative space, perfect. He took his time to make this image. He crafted it really well, and it's just a great series, The Center of the Universe. So I learned a lesson from a photographer named Jay Mizell, and Jay Mizell had a lesson about stepping back and crossing the street, or stepping back and moving around a building. So let's say that there's a cool building on Bowery, and that cool building is the new museum. It's very easy on Bowery to take that picture because that's the main thoroughfare. But what about getting that image of the museum from the back, walking around it? So what I did for the Casa Toscana project, because I'm a literal guy, I said that I gotta have a picture of the whole house because there's all these details of the Casa Toscana that's going on. And what I want to do is I want to get an overview, something very literal, something of the picture of the whole house. We had all these details of the kitchen, all nice, details of the refrigerator that's from the 1950s that won't break, lasted longer than my new refrigerator, it's only 5 years old. The oven, the fireplace, I wanted to get these details, but I also wanted to get the whole house. So I'm shooting with a Hasselblad with a Polaroid back. I'm shooting Fuji instant film on this, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm chimping it the way you would with a digital camera, but just using the instant camera. And I take this picture of the house. I said, this stinks. This has got the fence that my wife's father and grandfather built for the house. It's got this annoying lamp that Nana Stella really liked because it lit up the house, but it actually attracts lots of mosquitoes. It's bothering me. I had to get over here. I got the neighbor's house. This picture stinks, right? I think it stinks. Come on, guys. It's a bad composition. Doesn't look that good. But I had all these elements in my head that I had to get in there. Sometimes you have to step back and cross the street. So I think to myself, looking at the Polaroid or the Fujiroid, this picture looks terrible. So what would Jay Mizell do? Jay Mizell would walk around the corner. So I go behind me, deep into the olive field that's behind me. And when I walk back, I notice that there's some olive trees over to the side, and there's a little view of the house through it. So what picture is better out of these two? They're only taken about 10 minutes apart. Step back, get this picture. And the cool part about getting over here was that I could block out, for the most part, the annoying lamp. But I still have the indicator that the lamp is here. And look, we got Grandpa's and Dad's fence still there. And I could really get the capture the element of the house. I got rid of the neighbor's house and made it look a little better. So sometimes you take a picture, it doesn't look good, just walk around. Try the path least taken. Circle the subject. What does a bird of prey do before it swoops down on its prey? It circles the subject. So try to think about doing that. Some images work better in black and white and some work better in color. When images have bold colors, they definitely work better. When the subject matter denotes color or black and white, emotions can be transferred by colors really well. But it's best to experiment, capture in color, and in post later on play with the black and white. Or if you have a digital camera, set it up to shoot a RAW and a JPEG at the same time, but then bias the camera settings to do black and white so that your JPEG ends up being black and white, but you've got the RAW image, has all the color data, because it might be better. Let's look at this picture here. This is taken with a simple point and shoot digital camera. Which do we like better? Do we like the color better? Or do we like the black and white better? Let's raise our hands for color. Okay, black and white. So it looks like about a 60-40 towards black and white. The truth is that this one works good either way. It's up to it. But we've got the Sienna stonework of Tuscany works, but it's a church. Churches always look good in black and white because churches are kind of antique. Synagogues are antique. It always works good in black and white. So it kind of works either way, black and white or color. Take a look at this image. Does this image look better in color, or does it look better in black and white? Definitely color. Why in color?
Look at the red flowers.
It's those flowers, those little red little details. They go away in black and white, and there's a warmth to the color that's that Tuscan sun. Now there really wasn't warmth. I caught this alleyway had warmth, but if these not right when I walked by this alleyway, the nuns were here. And I was like, ooh, got to get this picture of the nuns. Lots of nuns walking through Italy. So I whip out the camera, turn it on, get in position. Again, I got to work fast. I got to know the camera. So the nuns were here. Luckily, nuns don't move too fast. So I was able to, now the nuns had walked another 8 feet and gotten into this highlight, this wash. Picture's done. It's over. So you got to grab it quickly. So that one works definitely better in color. Now check this out. This is pretty cool. I'm glad we're recording this. This is the same black and white image, but that's with a white background and that's with a black background. You could really see it on the plasmas on the side. Look at the detail in the walls. You see more detail in those shadows. You lose it in the highlights. So this goes to show you when you make your beautiful picture and you print it and you put it into a mat, choose wisely on a white or a black mat and avoid color mats. This isn't 1985 anymore. Interesting the way your eyes play with that. Exact same image, exactly the same. The only thing I'm changing is the background slide in the presentation itself. Obvious, right? I learned a lesson. I shot fall colors in Central Park with black and white in the 8x10 camera. What was I doing? But you know, the only way to learn is to make mistakes, you know, and so definitely works. This was a cool one. I captured this one in color, but I actually like the black and white better. Do you guys like the black and white better? It changes it so much. So I think here was that this is Union Square on a Saturday. It's a very common picture. It's a very normal picture. I did get a low angle to try to get up, and it's backlit with the trees, and it's got studium, not punctum. But when I turn it to black and white, the dynamic of the image changes greatly, and it just does something to it. So experiment, fool around with that black and white and color, especially portraits. Portraits can look really cool sometimes in black and white. Okay, so we're at the end of the presentation. I would like everybody now to take their hand and raise it over their heart. We're going to make some composition resolution vows. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, I will take more time to make fewer images. For those of you that are filling up 8 GB cards in record time and not using your Lightroom or your image editing programs because they're so complicated to go through all of them, try taking more time to take less images. It's really a wonderful thing. You'll notice your photography will go up, your horizons will be more straight, your subjects will have time and gesture, and everything will look a little bit better. So spend more time taking less images. I will go to see more photography exhibitions. This is a big one. This is really important. I will read more photography books. So I have a challenge for you guys, and this is the challenge. Do you have $5? No, I can't. Okay, so what I want you to do, you guys are here in New York. I want you to go to the Strand Bookstore. They're located on 12th and Broadway. I put Strand Books as a thing in there. Imagine this $1 bill is a $10 bill. Here's your challenge. I want you to take $10 and go to the Strand Bookstore, and I want you to go to the photography section and buy, I don't care how many books, but I want you to spend $10. First thing you're going to be surprised about is how cheap the books are at the Strand. There's a wonderful publisher called Taschen Publishing. Taschen's mission was to create fine art books that were very affordable. But I want you to go there and look at this series of books that they have, and especially we have a new photographer here. Go there and look at spend some time in that photography book section and find a photographer that has photographs that you would like to take and find out about that photographer and then kind of study it. Find a mentor, a classic photographer. Could be Bernice Abbott, it could be Non Golden, it could be Helmut Newton, it could be a range of different people, but you'll really spend $10 on that. Try to find a book. It could be Ouija, but spend $10. You'll find that there's a plethora of books to choose for $10. This is the last and most important vow. I lied to you. There isn't 3. There's actually 4. Are you ready for the most important one? Okay. There are other camera stores out there. But which camera store gives you the event space, free seminars, best prices, no commission salespeople, liberal return policy? We got it all here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to Beyond today. Thanks. Appreciate it.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.